Well, hello, welcome to our talk today. We're super excited for this. It's such an important topic and one that doesn't always get covered. So what we'll do is I'll do a quick introduction, and then we'll do a quick introduction, and we'll explain a little fundamental few pieces about what we might talk about in the future. Yeah, it'll give you a basic understanding and framework for some of the topics that we might discuss in the presentation. So for me, I'm an acupuncturist. I practice here at Surrey Holistic in Surrey and then also in London. And Chinese medicine is really about understanding how energy moves through our bodies in a very microcosmic way. In terms of the macrocosm, it's about looking at how we really see ourselves as not being totally distinct from nature. So acupuncture really looks at the cycles of life, so we can look at it from a 60-year cycle where each year we've got 5 elements and that affects who we are as people and the climates of the world, and then we can then go deeper and deeper. So one of the fundamental concepts of Chinese medicine is the idea of the Chinese clock, and the energy really starts at 3 a.m, which is the first breath. Really is when a child comes out, they take their first breath and they enter the world. And then we move through these 2-hour cycles and periods. And for me, this is so important, especially when it comes to shift working, because there's times, for example, 7 to 11 is the time of the stomach and the spleen, which is so important with our digestion and how our body converts what is useful into what sustains us going forward. So for us, it really is true that sort of, eat breakfast like a king, have lunch like a prince, and then dinner like a pauper, because we're using and following the nature of life and the body cycles. And then as you kind of go through, so a lot of times, for example, looking at it the other way, at 11 a.m. we start, at 11 p.m. we start at the time of the gallbladder. So then that's really, I often find that if I get to sort of 10 o'clock, I start to fall asleep, and then it gets to 11 p.m, and if I'm not in bed and I'm not asleep, I get that second wind, which is really the time of the liver. It's the yang of the liver, so it's the yang of the wood. So it's the time where we get that second wind. So abiding by these is so important. And then in terms of the shift work as well, I've put my terrible diagram there of the 5 elements, but there's so much in terms of following the seasonal patterns. So, now that we're coming into autumn and winter, it's about kind of eating more cooked foods, warmer foods, really trying to look after ourselves and eating with accordance to the seasons. So we'll touch on that a little bit more later, perhaps. That's my fundamental introduction.
Thank you, Josh. That's super interesting. Thank you. So let's go to forward. Okay. So my name's Anna. I'm a nutritional therapist, and I also work here at Surrey Holistic. And my focus with nutritional therapy is on circadian rhythms, so our biological circadian rhythms, which really fit beautifully with what Josh has just described about having these cycles. And with circadian rhythms, they're very much governed by the light from the sun, and then the sun going down and kind of dictated to by darkness. And those signals will come through our eyes, messages through to our brain to turn different hormones on and off to provide different functions around the 24-hour clock. And it makes assumptions that we will be either active or sleeping according to that cycle of light and darkness. So this poses a really specific challenge for shift workers who will be working contrary to that natural cycle, and also don't have necessarily that same opportunity to observe the 2-hour kind of functions and the main energy cycles within the Chinese medicine clock as well. But there are ways that you can, with some understanding and some knowledge and some planning and awareness, there are things you can do to still try to work within some of those rhythms, because there can be some more negative health outcomes if you're living kind of oblivious to these cycles. So we're just going to have a little touch on these. So shift workers, so more likely to have a limiting long-standing illness. So by that we mean a chronic health condition, something that is long-term that you live with, and possibly even more than one. So that could be a condition like high blood pressure, it might be heart disease, it might be issues with energy, diabetes, it might be to do with weight management. Yeah, thank you. Perfect, yeah, that's it. Okay, so also you're more likely to have weight issues, have type 2 diabetes, and eat less than the recommended daily portions of fruit and vegetables. And where that is quite arbitrary with the 5 a day message, that's really a recommendation from the government to just encourage people to eat more portions of fruit and veg, and that 5 a day should be an absolute minimum. We're really aiming for sort of 7 to 10 portions because it can be really reflective of somebody's overall health. If we're thinking of feeding our gut microbiome, our gut bacteria population, and we give it the variety that it loves to thrive and flourish, that can have a systemic effect on the rest of our overall health. It can be quite indicative of someone's general health. The more portions of fruit and veg that you eat, you can make quite accurate assumptions of somebody's general fitness and well-being and health. Not always, but it can be quite an indicator, even though it's obviously not sort of scientifically based, but it can be quite helpful. So you're going to see these on the screen, but these are 2 graphs, and this just talks about blood sugar, and blood sugar management is really key on this circadian rhythm. When the sun goes down in the evening, it sends a really strong message through our eyes to our brain that activity is done for the day. We obviously will be winding down. Our sleep hormone, melatonin, will be starting to rise, and that works a bit like a seesaw with our digestive hormones. So where melatonin rises, it will start to suppress the digestive hormones, because they're thinking, well, we don't need to be working optimally, because we don't need to be producing fuel for activity, because you're going to be slowing down, ready to go to bed. But obviously that poses a problem if you're in the middle of a late shift or you're about to start a night shift. And so through some sort of clever techniques, we can trick our body a little bit into maintaining that function. But in essence, whilst it's dark, we don't have the same amount of digestive capability as we do during daylight hours. So that means getting most of our calories in, our fuel broken down, and travelling around the body to produce energy whilst it's still daylight where possible. And then through the night, where we need to be still maintaining levels of activity, whether it's for focus, if you're thinking of like the emergency services, having to make really split-second decisions in quite emotive situations. So we need that fuel and that fine-tuned focus, but that will come from topping up fuel levels rather than following a great big meal at 3 in the morning, which is much more likely to just be sitting around in the digestive system, making us feel quite sluggish, and can have that knock-on effect on those health conditions that shift workers are more likely to experience with trying to break food down when the body thinks it should be having a sleep. So this is a template of like an ideal balanced plate of food, so that to avoid our big spikes of energy from relying on high sugar foods for energy and from a lot of caffeine, which is very common with shift workers to rely on, that will give you that temporary lift in energy, but it will be followed by a crash. And when we're on a crash, then we can feel very low, both physically and mentally. We can have quite strong cravings for high energy food, so we might reach for the chocolate bar in the vending machine, might have a caffeinated drink. We're far more likely to make less healthy food choices, but that is really short-term energy provision. To sustain us through a longer shift, we want to be releasing energy much more slowly, and we do that by balancing the plate of food with the different macronutrients. So up here we'll have our complex carbohydrates. So rather than the simple sugars, we've switched to the complex version of whole grain breads rather than white bread, not having a great big bowl of white pasta, which will convert to sugar very quickly and give us that spike, but then a crash. So maybe having brown pasta, but certainly just limiting our plate to a quarter of the portion size of that food group, because that does convert to energy nice and quickly. But if we switch to the complex versions, then we will get more fibre into the diet. And not only does that feed our gut microbiome, but it also releases energy more slowly, so we're less likely to have that crash. So that reduces the reliance on sugar and caffeine. We then have a really nice portion of protein, which again is like a quarter of the plate. We have a small amount of some healthy fats, and if you want to look at what different examples those are, this is at the healthyplate.eu, this template. And then half of the plate is vegetables and fruit. So we're getting the seasonal vegetables and fruit in at every meal where possible, because, as Josh said, those seasonal foods are meeting the needs of our body temperature, our energy levels, and so on, and meeting those needs throughout the different seasons. So a salad at this time of year going into autumn and winter is not really going to cut it. We need the more earthy vegetables, those that are more starchy and going to give us more sustained energy to meet those needs. And then we just think about the benefit of this and how this fits. And I think this will follow on with Josh talking about energy and acupuncture and the Chinese medicine. Because if you think about getting that plate of food right, if you kind of look at your plate of food and think, what am I expecting this to produce? What kind of fuel am I expecting this to produce for me? What do I expect to, what's my performance going to be for the next few hours? What am I expecting? Do I expect to feel quite sleepy and a bit lacking in focus? Or do I expect to be energised and be able to really concentrate for a number of hours? Because if you get this nutrition right, then maybe there's something left in the tank to do some exercise before or after your shift. And that might depend on your chronotype, so whether you're more likely to be a morning person or an evening person, which is a genetic thing as well. So if you can fit your exercise in around your natural chronotype, that can be helpful. It can feel a bit easier. So you may have something left to exercise. We know that has a physical benefit and mental benefit when we exercise. Even more so if we can do that outside, we can get exposure to fresh air, to sunlight, to vitamin D, and that's important as a shift worker as well, especially if you're working a lot during the dark. So rebalancing your body clock by having that fresh air and that exposure to sunlight can help resetting your body clock again. That will have a direct impact on your stress levels and your stress management. That will impact your sleep, as will exercise. Positively, hopefully. When we've slept, we make better food choices, we have more energy, perhaps to cook from scratch, to maybe do some planning. Whereas when we're really tired, this feels like the last thing in the world you want to be doing. And maybe we also have some better emotional balance. Maybe we get our sense of humour back, which can be the first thing to go when we're really tired, and we can feel very intolerant. And again, as shift workers, and I'm thinking again about the emergency services, about people in like nursing roles, those kinds of roles, they need to dig deep a lot. They need buckets of patience with people and tolerance. And so that can be a real challenge to find your empathy when you're feeling exhausted. So really you can see the knock-on effect of getting those plates of food right and why it's really worth investing in that nourishment from your food. And hopefully from time to time you feel like optimal you is there, is present. And this is just another illustration of different elements of self-care that can help to put you really in a kind of, to be aging well, to be, and it's more about life, about health span, rather than thinking about your lifespan. You want your longevity to be as healthy as possible. So investing in your diet, by doing some exercise, by sleeping well, by not smoking, by managing your cholesterol, your weight, your blood pressure and your blood sugar. All of these can be within your control, and many of them are influenced by what you eat. And where you might feel lacking in time, you might feel out of control with your shift pattern, your workload and so on. But a lot of this is within your control, and actually it's not something that anyone else is particularly going to focus on your behalf. So it is down to you to make some of those difficult decisions and priorities around a busy shift pattern and a challenging shift pattern, but it will put you in a stronger, more resilient position to be a healthy shift worker.
I love the make sense.
Do
I
you?
think like the starting point of just it can seem so complicated to do these things, and it can seem like rocket science. And I guess a lot of what we do is make rocket science accessible, but actually just your opening point of, if you look at the plate in front of you, what do you expect it to make you feel? Because we know that if we go out for a curry, we're going to feel tired the next day. Like, it doesn't require super complex decision making. It's just a simple question that will make us think about how we could make the change.
Yeah, and I don't expect people to get this right 100% of the time. Life happens. We're caught short. So if you think like maybe try for 80% of the time, and make peace with the fact that 20% of the time you're eating on the hoof, you're having to do ready meals, get a frozen pizza out of the into the oven, but focus on that. What do you expect that to provide for you? If it's a frozen pizza and you're having it with a pint of beer, how are you going to feel tomorrow? You're not going to feel as great tomorrow as if you've got a plate of nourishing food, which does take effort, and that is there's no two ways around that. There's no quick, easy way. It's not going to fall out of a packet and nourish you every part of your body beautifully. It takes time. And I think we've got caught into a bit of a trap as to like how quickly can you provide your meal in the evening. 5-minute meals, 10-minute meals, 15-minute meals, like cookery books. Well, actually, it might take you an hour, but you might be cooking for 4 people, and you might make double so that you've got no effort to make the next day because it's done. But that could be a really valuable hour spent nourishing a number of people who will benefit and flourish. And tomorrow you've got no effort to make because you've done all the work in one day. So actually, it can be really valuable time well spent.
And it seems to me it's such a beautiful thing to do. And so many patients actually love cooking, and they kind of forget that. And I think we're meant to do everything quickly. It seems like a waste of time. But actually, for so many people, it's something that feels good. You feel quite happy. You kind of get into the flow. You can put on a bit of music. You can make it quite fun. And I guess if people are feeling stressed, some of these other aspects, emotional balance, actually kind of bringing some of that sort of mindfulness in terms of how you cook, but also when you eat, can be so impactful as well.
Definitely. And I think I talk to some people who just say like they hate cooking, and I think it's maybe start really small. Don't let this feel overwhelming. Start really small and just think, okay, maybe on a Friday night, if you're off on a Friday night, that's your wind down. So maybe you get a glass of wine and some nice music if you want to, and you have that focus on cooking that lovely meal, and that will be appreciated, even if if you're cooking for young people and they don't say thank you, it's nourishing them, it's doing them good. But yes, it's time well spent. It's never going to be wasted.
Well, I guess for a lot of shift workers, I imagine it's almost like you're constantly racing against the clock. Like you want to get as much sleep as possible, and then you're getting up last minute, you're rushing out the door, so then it's easy to take a quick coffee or an energy drink. And I guess similarly, the shift patterns can be difficult where they don't necessarily find that time to find the cooking. So I guess it's also that sort of antidote to constantly having loads of stress because you're living by the clock almost.
Always, yeah, exactly. And having to make decisions about shall I sleep to get 6 hours if I'm lucky, or shall I get up and do some cooking, or shall I get up and do some exercise? And they're tough decisions. So it can take a bit of planning, sitting down with the diary and the shift pattern and working out when you can fit these things in and who else you can maybe get to help do those things as well. It doesn't have to maybe fall to one person in the family to do all of that.
I guess also colleagues could be really good, the sort of, the accountability buddies almost, whereas I guess everyone's on the same thing, and if you have people doing the same shifts, you can perhaps work with each other to make sure that you're making the right decisions.
Exactly. Yeah, and champion each other and encourage each other and talk about little recommendations and suggestions, like have you tried this, have you thought about that, and that can be really helpful as well. And creating that supportive culture where I think in my career in policing, the culture was, we have donuts on a Friday, we have pizza on we have this, we have certain habits and that culture wasn't driven by a focus on health and on keeping everybody well. But I think with the knowledge as to what those choices can do, you can update the culture, the work culture, if you've got other people on board.
I guess it's a lot of it comes from the top down almost. I guess a lot of the people, a lot of the people that I treat that are shift workers are slightly older because the problems are already happening, whereas actually the older generations have almost a duty to make others aware of the choices that, it's about much more treating when they're younger and making the right choices early on rather than waiting to the last minute. So I guess that community and the top-down approach can be really useful in helping guide people to make the right decisions at a much earlier age as they're starting their careers.
Definitely, and I think when you're starting a career and you might feel quite invincible and you think, oh, it's not really relevant to think about my long-term health and how I'm going to feel when I retire. But you're absolutely right. I think investing in those good habits early on and understanding about the different rhythms and the different clocks, and having that knowledge, because I didn't have that knowledge when I started out in my 20s, and I made some terrible food choices. Oh my goodness.
I'm sure you still do as well sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
18% and 20%.
Of course, exactly. Exactly, but it's that don't beat yourself up. Just the next day you can go, okay, today we start fresh, and we've got opportunities today. So it's never about, oh, I failed, so there's no point.
I think perfection is the enemy almost. We want good enough, we want healthy enough, we want to be always striving to do better, but never beating ourselves up if we fall short, because if we do feel tired, we'll have a second coffee, or it's about being kind and listening to your body as much as anything, I think. Yeah,
totally. So how do you think that the Chinese medicine clock kind of fits with circadian rhythms and shift work? What can shift workers think about to realign with that a bit?
Well, it's a great question, and it's one. I mean, definitely the eating side of things, so when you're eating and what you are feeding yourself with. So we've spoken about the seasonal patterns, and especially now these kind of more cooked foods. Listening to if it's cold outside, not having. I accidentally told one of my friends that this week I had an ice cream after dinner one night, and they're like, Josh, what are you doing? It's freezing cold outside and you're having ice cream. And but it's about enjoying it as well. And then it's really about thinking about the Chinese clock. So even there's so many like biomedicine, and I've got my Aura ring, and that tells me my REM sleep, which is so important in how kind of our rest and recovery is and how we feel. And even sometimes when I finish the clinic at 9 o'clock and then go home, have dinner, watch TV for an hour and then go to bed, and I can see, I can track on my watch that the sleep is then shocking. I'm not getting enough deep sleep and all these sorts of things. So then it's about really trying to force myself to eat a healthy meal earlier and actually blocking the time out. Or sometimes it's just having a smaller meal later on. So even if I do get home at 9 o'clock, sometimes actually I feel hungry when I get there. But then after half an hour I don't feel that hungry, and I kind of sometimes I think I eat because I feel I have to almost, and it's listening to my body. So even for me, the small things make such a big difference. And then with the seasonal patterns, like now it's getting much darker. So I have a number of patients this week who said, actually I feel like eating at 5 p.m. because that's when it gets dark. That's when our kind of circadian rhythm is kind of changing.
Exactly.
So it's really, for me, and that's where I love the beauty of just what does the plate feel like, because when it gets darker and it's darker at 5 o'clock, so maybe it is time to have a little bit of food earlier on. If it's cold outside, why not eat warmer foods because we feel cold? It's really, there's so much complexity behind Chinese medicine, but actually I really just love the intuitive nature of kind of paying attention to the world around us and listening to what the world and our bodies are telling us. There's something so beautiful about just being present and attentive, which I guess a lot of us are missing.
Yeah, definitely. I think we can be on an autopilot so easily, can't we?
And that's where I love the idea of, almost just sitting down at the beginning of the week and looking at your shift patterns and saying, okay, these days I know, maybe I'm waking up slightly later so I can go out and get a fresh walk, get a bit of a walk. And like I've said to you before, it's sometimes I wake up and I feel like I need a coffee, and actually if I make the right choice and go for a swim instead, I completely forget that I don't have a coffee. And I guess it's sometimes these small changes can have such a big impact, but it's just about making sure that we go out and do these small things. As perhaps for some shift workers, it's just going out and having a walk rather than having an energy drink before they go off.
Yeah, definitely. I think the hardest part can be getting those trainers on and getting out the door. There's so many things that you can talk yourself out of it and think, I'm too tired, it's rainy, it's windy, it's dark. But I think once you've got out there, you never regret it. You never come back from that, whatever it is, and go, oh, I wish I hadn't done that.
Unless it's raining.
Unless it's raining. But even then, you might feel quite exhilarated from it and a bit more alive. But it can be so habitual to just do things every day because that's how you've done it for the last 10 years or whatever, and it's become a habit. So I guess it is just, like you say, just giving yourself some time to look at that schedule and think, where are the real challenges going to be next week? Is there a day, am I going on to nights? So do I need to do a little bit of preparation or some planning on some of my rest days before I go on to nights? Do I need to make double one day so that because that day is a disaster and no one eats well that day because we haven't got time? So do I have to have something just ready as leftovers to help with that? And then what can you take to work for a night shift that is going to be quick and easy to nourish you and be warming at 3 a.m? Maybe it is like a really chunky vegetable soup or something plant-based that's easier to digest, but it's not going to like spike that blood sugar, or that's not caffeinated, that's going to then stop you sleeping when you get home as well, because that might really impact your sleep if you're relying on caffeine until you get home.
Yeah, I think caffeine is such a big piece of nutrition, isn't it? And I'm guilty of always having a coffee or two, and I know if you're having coffee at 3 a.m, it's almost the worst thing that can be doing in some respects. I guess sometimes there is a requirement to get home safely, and you feel like you need that to be able to drive.
Definitely.
But perhaps there's other choices that you could be making.
Yeah, for sure. And that's really common, I think, to have that reliance to get home, to have that alertness and that focus. And from that point of view, caffeine can be quite helpful earlier in the shift. When you're going into work and it's dark and your body wants to sleep, you can blunt your melatonin with caffeine and give you that extra focus and alertness. So that can be really helpful at the start of a shift, but certainly towards that second part of the shift, you don't want it to be then still travelling around in your bloodstream 6 to 8 hours later when you then want to be trying to get to sleep.
I guess even for like emergency services, if you're running on adrenaline almost and then you're having caffeine, we're kind of heightening our cortisol levels and we're kind of ramping ourselves up. We're actually, perhaps we're then not thinking rationally and making the right choices because we're almost wired. Yeah, it's finding that natural way of building our energy levels and sustaining us.
Exactly.
And how much of it do you think is to do with the emotional well-being as well? Because I guess for some shift workers, it's a bit more isolating, and then you're not maybe feeling 100% in yourself, but you're also not feeling it in your body. It seems like to me, so much of what we do is helping people to feel happier as well as feeling better in themselves.
Definitely, and I think that giving yourself permission to have some you time is really important. And again, it can be one more thing to try and fit into a busy schedule, but finding that thing that you enjoy, ideally with other people, because shift work can be quite socially isolating. You spend a lot of time on your own, and it can be tempting after a night shift. If you wake up at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, it can be quite tempting just to kind of hunker down, watch a film, do something, or maybe you've just got to do the school run and come back and cook dinner and then you're off to work. But just trying to find something that's for you, that gives you some enjoyment, hopefully that gives you the opportunity for laughter, for some good social interaction with people that support you, champion you, can really help with the stress management. And again, we know that will impact sleep, that impacts this, we see how it's all interrelated. So giving yourself permission to have your hobby and guard it, that time, and say, no, that's my hour. where
It can
possible.
it can be really hard to safeguard that time. I know I try to, and then someone wants to book in or whatever, and
Yeah.
suddenly your boundaries slip. So actually having that strong belief of no, I need this time, and I guess for families as well. I guess a lot of times
it's really tough.
the partner is not a shift worker, so then you're almost crisscrossing each other, and you don't actually get to spend as much time together.
No, and you can both be juggling the childcare together, and that has to be, obviously be the priority. But that phase isn't forever, so that again, that can be a sort of relatively temporary period. But then when that changes and you have then got some time back, then it's kind of going, okay, it's your time now, and you go out and you find your thing, and you can really kind of get your mojo back, and that's important that you've got that enjoyment.
I think it's so important. I find I speak to so many of my patients around, like, even if it's just 1 hour a week to go out with the partner or whatever, and especially with childcare, it's really hard because you're constantly, looking after someone else, and actually you don't necessarily spend the time together reconnecting of checking in, how are you doing,
Absolutely.
we end up almost living our own lives with kids in the centre, and then it can be really isolating as well, can't it?
Definitely. Yeah, it's really important.
Oh, I want to twist my sign there. I love the centre as well, and this makes sense diagram. Like, so many of us don't feel optimal. We never work towards consistently getting better, or what does our best selves look like. I think we all accept, we don't feel quite right, or we expect someone else, we expect our GPs, our doctors, whatever else, to try and make us feel better, to put us on a pill to stop acid reflux, or the stress and anxiety. We rely so much on other people, or we just put up with it. We put up with it for so long until we just don't know any better. And I really love the sense of just being optimal you, where that's the goal we should aspire for, isn't it?
I think it is, and I think, like you said, so many people live with different aches and pains and symptoms and don't even question that actually there's a root cause for that, and you don't necessarily have to feel like that. If you work through it, it can take a long time, but a lot of people with symptoms, you can kind of work through what's caused those and look at the triggers, and they can often become symptom free. Not always, but it is possible with working on each of these different areas. As you'll see with your acupuncture clinic as well, it's that kind of longer term solution, rather than sort of sticking a plaster over it for today, but it's never really gone away. It's like, let's just hide it for a bit and not think about it, and we'll just live with it. But actually, we can rip the plaster off and heal it and let it heal.
That's why, in Chinese medicine, I think in the clinic we treat so many patients after a disease has happened, once it's been a chronic pain for years and years and years, and actually in the classical text right at the beginning, they talk about how, one of my favourite quotes is, if you start digging a well when you're already thirsty, it's too late. And it is this kind of, we get ill, and Chinese medicine is really about preventing illness before it arises. And I think that's what I love about all of this, is we can try and influence people to make the right choices now, rather than trying to kind of paper over the cracks or trying to fix them much later on when a significant change has happened within the body. Because the longer it goes on, and especially for me, the sleep, sort of, 1 to 3 a.m. in Chinese medicine is to do with the liver. So that's where the sleep is so important. We should be kind of resting, lying down, which isn't always possible, but it's a time where our body sort of replenishes the blood. Liver is in charge of that. So it's really about, at the beginning, I think there's a subtle change. Like, our body's always telling us long before that something needs to, I was saying to you earlier about the dry eyes. It's like, my body's telling me something isn't quite right, whether it's a physical problem of, I'm slightly short-sighted, so
Mhm.
I've had my eye test, and I'm on top of it. But then it's also maybe it's too much stress, or
Mhm.
my body's trying to tell me something, and if I just ignore it and keep rubbing or putting on the drops, I'm actually just ignoring what my body's trying to tell me, that there's something in my life which isn't quite working as well as it should. And I think so often our symptoms are a little reminder to us that we need to make a positive change.
Yeah.
If we don't, things are going to get worse.
Yeah, and I think it can be really important to people to deal with it when they've got pain and when they've had a health scare. Then suddenly it's really relevant. Whereas in those years leading up to that point, it doesn't feel relevant because you're not facing pain, you're not living with pain. You might be living with a bit of low energy and being tired, but until you're on your knees with fatigue, it's not relevant enough for you to keep on acknowledging the importance and to prioritise. And you can't necessarily prove what you've prevented.
Yeah, sometimes it's really hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
Things like yoga and these sorts of exercises.
Yeah.
I mean, you feel better when you do it. There's a huge dopamine hit, but it's much later on when when you're 70 and you can still move around.
Exactly.
That's when you can tell the difference.
Yeah, and you're not on a whole cocktail of prescription medication.
I think that's where, for me, that's that optimal self. So for our optimal selves now, we're going to be helping ourselves far into the future.
Yeah. And those habits quite quickly become embedded. Those new healthy habits, quite quickly, don't they? They become part of your everyday life, and it doesn't feel so hard because it just becomes a new habit. And
it's the small changes as well, isn't it? I think we don't have to make dramatic changes all at once.
No.
Sometimes it is just changing one or two habits at a time and kind of cascading that over the longer periods of time.
Exactly. Even just thinking so simply about like how do you start the day, whatever time of day that is, whether it's in the mid-afternoon when you've woken up or in the morning, what do you break your fast with? You may have just broken that fast with a bowl of Kellogg's cereal all your life. And so now if we're thinking about quality nourishing food, and we're going to switch that to a more savoury breakfast, or certainly a more naturally sweet breakfast, that can be huge for some people because they say, but I love my crunchy nut cornflakes. But a few months down the line, again, you've just created a new habit, and now you have a savoury breakfast and you don't think twice about it, and those new flavours feel completely familiar and normal. But it's about just making those gradual switches.
I think for me, sometimes, the cornflakes and all these sorts of things, there's more sugar in there than sweets, isn't there? I think sometimes it's looking at just the labels, and one habit I've gotten into, which I don't know if it would be helpful, but I always just look at how many ingredients are in something. And, I'm just a humble acupuncturist. I learned so much from you and all of your expertise in this, but most of the things I don't quite fully understand. But just looking at a label and seeing, okay, well, they all seem like English, and there's not a huge amounts of crazy ingredients, and actually just going back to me, it's almost a simple check. It's not just looking at the plate and how does it feel, but it's also looking at a label and going, how many of these ingredients do I recognise?
Exactly.
And sometimes there's ones where it's got 60 different things, and then in others there's 4. And you kind of don't have to know the science to know which one is healthy.
Exactly.
And I think it's sometimes just, for me, that quick check of, okay, I recognise most of these, they all sound natural, I feel more confident than something else. And it's amazing in the supermarket, isn't it? When you look at 2 different packets, 2 different brands, and the ingredients are almost completely different. And for me, sometimes it is just those small things. Actually, this one looks slightly healthier, so I'm going to choose that.
That's a brilliant tip, and I think that's really powerful because, as you said, the ingredients that you generally recognise, your body will know what to do with those. Your body recognises them and goes, oh yes, this is food, I know what to do with this. Whereas the one with the 60 ingredients, and those ones particularly that you can't necessarily pronounce and have no clue what they are, the body will be like, I kind of half recognise it as food, but it's like it's an edible-like substance, I'm not quite sure. And so it might generate some inflammation through your immune system, just in case it is the enemy. And we can have that, and if you have those types of food regularly, then that inflammation can just be simmering away under the surface for quite a long time.
That's what I think. Again, it's one of those where we're kind of building on optimum now, so that in the future, you know, how much of it makes a significant impact. You know, I don't necessarily see the difference now, and you know, everything, even my, you know, especially my kind of like facial products and the things that I use on an everyday basis, I've simplified it right down. Like, I use a brand called Horace, which I think is so brilliant because everything is like, you know, it's 95% natural, and it just makes it makes me feel better. But even though I don't know the difference now, I think, you know, in 20 years' time, these small changes are going to thank me.
Right.
And I think it is just, if we make enough small changes, in the long run, we'll see significant impacts.
Yeah, I agree. And I think where you talked so much about the liver and the role of the liver, having that chance to regenerate and kind of detoxify is really important with that as well. It's like, what toxic load are we putting through the liver?
Yeah.
And then on the Chinese medicine clock, how much time are we allowing the liver for repair?
I think it's so. I always feel so sorry for our livers. It's, you know, we put them through hell, and somehow they regenerate and support us. And I mean, for me, I have a soft spot for all the different organs. But yeah, for me, the liver, especially. I mean, in the UK, it's so bad with alcohol and everything that we do. I feel so sorry for our livers. It's no wonder that, you know, most of my patients tend to have sort of liver imbalance somewhere. Just because we're all like
bombarding it.
Yeah, and sometimes just being kind to ourselves and being kind to our organs,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so well, hopefully that's given people, shift workers or people who live with shift workers, an idea about some of the challenges that they face, but also hopefully some hope and some practical suggestions, rather than feeling further overwhelmed. But
yeah, for me, I always learn so much from you, so thank you. What I love, for me, it's the simplicity. It's doing the simple things and making sure that we're looking after ourselves now, so that in the future our bodies thank us.
Yeah.